couple of minutes. Refocus. Okay, thank you. This is probably going to be definitely going to be a very interesting class for me because I'm a student here too. I'm learning what this looks like, this new version of this, and I'm also a student of everything we do here. It's probably going to be taught at 2 or 3 different levels and simultaneously, just because everybody's going to hear what they can hear, and we have people at all different levels of experience. We have people who are brand new to this work, and people who have done it recently, and people who've been a while since they've done it, and people who have mastered it are all here. So we'll be talking at different levels. One level that we'll be talking about is the level of script, and that's the first level. We identifying our scripts, which is to say our fears, and the behaviors that go with them, and the resistance behaviors that go with them, and learn what that's all about. But at the intermediate and at every other level, we'll be more working on the subtitle to this class, which is called Eliminating Personal Sense. And these are not in conflict with each other at all. Personal sense is those things well, it's my Lee-ness, and your J-ness, and your shariness. It's those things that, when I think about this being, I think about it as a Lee. If I think about it as Lee, or if I think about this height, or this sex, or this age, or profession, or what have you, all those thoughts that I have about Lee are what I mean by personal sense. And it's that personal sense stuff that's determining Lee's experience, okay? I'm going to start, sometimes if I'm using Lee in the third person, that's just because I want you to distinguish between the human experience and the spiritual being that I am, and that's having this human experience, as you are. Having your own, there's always this duality, appears to be this duality. So Lee has a lot of concepts. He's been very carefully trained since birth. Not to consider previously, but since this birth he's been carefully trained to believe in God or not believe in God, or this particular God, to believe in this country and believe in this and that and all these things, and this is right and this is wrong and this is socially acceptable and this isn't, and all this stuff. He's got all of this conditioning, He's been trained to have concepts. He has an idea of what's right and wrong. He also has a lot of things that he's the list is the things that he loves or hates or fears or desires. Okay, those are really the four lists. Everything that I love or hate or fear or desire is something that this personal sense, something that Lee loves or hates or fears or desires. It's not something that the spiritual being is the least bit interested in any of that. That's all personal sense. And that's the humanhood stuff. And the game is that experiencing God and experiencing humanhood are mutually exclusive. At any given time, I'm either having my human experience or I'm having a God experience. I'm feeling the presence. I don't know if people get offended by the word God or not, but we'll call it the presence. But if I'm aware of the presence, that's what I call a God experience. And when I'm aware of the presence, then I'm not in Lee's likes and dislikes and fears and hates and stuff like that. I have no idea where I was going with that, but about personal sense. So the game is to diminish personal sense, and the because personal sense is that which is preventing us from experiencing God. All of my loves, hates, fears, and desires are write those lists someday. And those lists are a list of things that are preventing me from experiencing God. Okay? And the ones that are preventing me the most from experiencing God are the fears. And interestingly enough, the fantasies that are designed to give me hope while I'm buried in these fears. Yes?
Why do the loves?
Human love, which translates as lust or a business deal in which I'll give you this and you'll give me this, or maybe if I have you around you'll make me feel better about myself, or blah, blah, blah. Human love. Lee is incapable of loving. Love is of spirit. Love is of God. Lee is capable of expressing the spiritual love that pours through him, but he is personally not capable of loving. In any event, the subtitle for this workshop is Eliminating Personal Sense. And at the ultimate level of this workshop, it's eliminating all personal sense. And at the fundamental level of this workshop, it's eliminating that portion of personal sense which is the boulders in our path, i.e. fears and fantasies. Okay? So it all ties together in one package, and it's like we have this big boulder in front of us, which is a fear I have every time my script used to be that I'll never be accepted. And so the boulder in my life was that every situation I was in, all I could see is that I wasn't going to be accepted, So after you blast away that boulder, then you find that there are some more pretty good-sized rocks that were behind it that you couldn't see from the boulder. Okay, and then you blast away those rocks, and there are some stones. And my sponsor told me 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, she said, it's a lot like playing in a sandbox. She said, you're in a sandbox and you've got a screen, and you put the screen through the sandbox, and you bring it up, and there's all sorts of clods of sand on it, okay? And so you push them through, and you push through, and eventually you get to where it comes through, and there's never any clumps of sand on it, okay? And then God taps you on the shoulder and hands you a finer screen. Okay? That's the way it works. Eventually it would be ideal to get rid of all personal sense, but that certainly is not anybody's target, because trying to get rid of all personal sense is a way to sustain it. Instead, we will be working on seeing clearly the major things of personal sense which are messing up our lives. Barbara.
Hey, Lee, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Did you just say it's not about getting rid of personal sense, it's about... because that'll sustain it? It's about...
I said it's not about my trying to get rid of all personal sense because that will sustain it.
Right, and it's just about seeing it, right?
That's right. It's about seeing it. It's about
Okay.
in every case, it's not about getting rid of the scripts. It's not about getting rid of the fears. It's not about getting rid of anything. It's about gaining enough understanding and clarity on it that it dissolves all by itself.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's our primary tool in this workshop and everywhere else, is to watch things dissolve, the untrue things dissolve. So we're not really going to eliminate fear and fantasy. We're going to gather enough truth and understanding that fear and fantasy dissolves. The eroded goes away, seen for the nothing that it was. There's absolutely nothing supporting their fears or fantasies. There's nothing holding them there. There's nothing maintaining them there. There's nothing giving them strength. There's absolutely nothing to your fear and fantasy except what you bring to it, namely your fear, your conviction, your lack of understanding, your whatever. So by correcting our understanding and by bringing the experience of the presence of God into our life, these things just dissolve. But they won't dissolve, I guess we can go there for a minute, they won't dissolve if we don't look at them specifically. I'm going to comment on that. There is a fantasy that is maintained by lots of high spiritual teachers that if you just get high enough, just get into the silence deep enough, just get experience enough of the presence of God, that just get clear enough or high enough, meditate enough, that all of this stuff will disappear. Okay? And I go back to the Infinite Way because that's the teaching that I was exposed to, and it's also an extremely high teaching. I've known 4 Infinite Way teachers who have taught Infinite Way for years. And Barbara Moll, who brought through this work, was an Infinite Way teacher. A very high lady with great clarity. She had the healing consciousness. She was capable of healing people. And having healed people or taught a rapturously high class or whatever, she would then go home and throw a tantrum at her husband because she had a script. Sherry was there. Is this true, Sherry? Is that fair?
I lived with her, so.
Sherry lived with Barbara. We have Sherry is here to keep me honest and loving. So there was a teacher who taught the Infinite Way for 23 years and still was experiencing script events when she went home. And it was in fact that she went to God and asked what's going on here. That finally drove her to her knees, and she asked what's going on here, and that's when the revelation of the script and kid work came through. Okay? Now I'll tell you of another student of Joel's who I meditated with. I went out to her house every Saturday for years and meditated with her, and she was the highest, sweetest, lightest, and the room was filled with love, and it was joy, and I'm driving 50 miles each way just to be there with this woman for an hour, It was so high and light and joyful, okay? And then we'd go out to the lake for lunch, and she would, feel like she was being dismissed by the waitress who didn't want to do separate bills for the 14 people at the table who didn't want to do something. She felt like she was being disrespected, okay? A script event, in other words. And another colleague of mine tells me about another teacher she went to for years who did the same thing, So I know of 4 examples of infinite way teachers who have been practicing infinite way teachers for years who clearly have not finished this work. It just didn't happen. And meditating 6 hours a day is not going to do it. What's going to do it is seeing clearly the lie that's causing the problem. Okay? And that's all. That's the only thing that can do it. Jesus said, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Jesus is a master, by the way. This is not a Christian class, but this is a class of masters, and Jesus is certainly one of the highest masters. Jesus, as Joel likes to point out, Jesus did not say the truth will set you free. Jesus said, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Okay? So, my experience is that what's necessary is to see the difficulty clearly, specifically and clearly, and then the work's done. Okay? Then it will dissolve. It will go away to the extent that you have God in your life and lift your consciousness enough that you're not constantly reinforcing the problem.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
On your example, when you were talking about the woman who went and was disrespected by the waitress, I guess because I've taken this work before, because sometimes, a waitress can come by and disrespect you and it's like no big thing. And then sometimes it gets you at that guttural level, like that feels like, oh my God, I'm going to die, kind of.
Yep.
And so isn't it true that sometimes that can happen and it's not necessarily a script event? I mean, because we all get dissed or things happen on a day-to-day basis that maybe sometimes don't bother us. But
if it doesn't bother you, it's not a script event. If it does bother you, it's a script event.
Even if it bothers you, it's kind of like a gnat would bother you, go away. It's not... You get my question?
There are depths of script event, of course, but if you're having a reaction, it's script.
Okay.
Period.
Thank you.
And the depth of the reaction, the strength of the reaction is determined by how deeply you believe your script or how afraid of dying you are from it or whatever. But if you're having a reaction, this was a clear case that, there were 14 of us at the table. And this poor waitress was trying to hustle. I think that she doesn't have time to do 14 checks. And we don't need them anyway. It was just very interesting to watch that. So we need to see it clearly. And upon seeing it clearly and bringing God into our life, it will dissolve. Yes, please.
You accept this reaction as script, but what if it's a good reaction? Is it still script?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a good reaction. Now we're getting a little technical with words. What do you mean by a good reaction?
Well, just to me...
It depends on what we mean by reaction. Let's separate between reaction and response, maybe. Sure, lots of things bring me delight. I find the measure of the amount of God in your life is the true measure of the amount of God in your life is how much joy and delight and love and peace there is in your life. These are the yardsticks that I use. And lots of things now, more and more, always, more and more things delight me and they delight me more and more. But that's not a reaction. That's just an experience that's happening, and Lee has nothing to do with that. Lee did not have a reaction that caused the joy. The fact is that there's, at that moment, enough God in Lee's life that it's like God's delighted with what Lee's looking at. It's not like Lee is delighted. So that's not a reaction. That's not what I mean by a reaction. When we get one class further, I'll say that if there's a glitch, it's script. And there are no good glitches.
Yeah. Good glitch.
There are diminished glitches, and they're better, but...
Yeah.
All right. Barbara used to say that there were 3 steps to getting free. The real thing we want to do is get free. Now, that's what I've been all about, and all the classes we've taught here are about getting free, and all the workshops we've been talking about. By the way, at the Leelaa.org, there are, if you look at the list across the top, there's some audios there, and you will find the audios of the classes that have gone on here since 1996. And Paulina's been going through them, and telling you where all the links are broken, and they're all free, and feel free to go there and listen, and some of them are very pertinent to this, so dig around in there and play. And also, regarding meditation, there's a meditation here every Sunday night from 7 to 8, including tonight, and it's really officially a half-hour meditation from 7:30 to 8, but people wanted to come earlier, so it keeps moving back. So the request is that you get here by 7:30 and stay till 8 is the only request. But people are not coming before 7, and it keeps getting longer and longer, and that's just delightful. So there's meditations here. And as I said before, there's books and tapes and stuff like that, which I'll be happy to show you how to get a hold of, so take advantage of all of that. Anyway, Barbara said getting free requires 3 things. The first is getting real. And I'm going to just be very brief on that right now. Getting real as distinct from getting emotional. Okay? I think we can just go right there. Feel your feelings. Think your thoughts. Be who you really are. But don't talk about that, and don't think about who you really are, and don't get emotional about it, and don't talk yourself into things, and don't make a soap opera out of it. Get real. Just fundamentally get real. Actually, before that, we need to drop the belief in good and evil. And that includes the belief in right and wrong. What I think is right and what I think is wrong, or what I think is good and what I think is evil, is entirely the product of my conditioning. It's been taught to me by the church I happen to have been brought up in, by my parents, and who were taught by their parents, who were taught by their parents, and by the schools I go to, and by the television that I watch, and by the Madison Avenue stuff that's dumped on me, and on and on and on. All of this stuff has conditioned me to have a belief about what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. And if I go to another country and talk to people, in Japan, if I go to Japan and talk to a 13-year-old girl, I will find absolutely no overlap between right and wrong, between my concept of right and wrong and good and bad and hers, probably. I think it's impolite to belch. She thinks it's necessary to compliment the chef, etc., etc. On and on and on. So, first thing we have to do is destroy the belief in right and wrong. The second thing we have to do is get real. And that means drop the emotion, tear up the scripts, tear up the fantasies, accept what is. What did you call that, Aaron? Complete radical acceptance? Remember that?
Deep radical acceptance.
Yeah, deep radical acceptance. That's getting real. Acceptance of what is, of what's happening. Osho, my first guru, pointed out, he said, asked about, what's God's will and what's my will, and his comment was, your will is what you want. God's will is what's happening. The difference is pain. And the amount of pain is the difference multiplied by how badly you want your way. The corollary to that, of course, is if you want a pain-free life, don't have any wants, because you're not going to be able to predict what God's will is, or cause it to change. So if you want to avoid pain, then stop having your own will. Accept what is, complete radical acceptance. And the third step is learning to love. And this workshop will address all 3 of these, especially the second one, getting real, to identify a lot of emotion and stuff like that and get rid of it. And the third one, learning to love, because learning to love is the inevitable result of eliminating personal sense. Every piece of Lee that I get rid of clears the space for the love of God to flow through here. Makes room for love, makes room for joy, makes room for peace, makes room for delight. So we will be learning to love as a byproduct of eliminating fear and fantasy. All right, I've already mentioned love, hate, fear, and desire. Let's talk about the first piece of work. This week's work. And it's in your books. If you go to the part of your book called The 7 Steps of Script, Week 1, Uncovering Our Hidden Scripts. And that's the work we're going to do this first week. And we do that by making up 2 lists and sharing them with somebody. The first list, and read this stuff. I'm not going to read it all completely, but read it. It's been finely tuned and finely honed over 9 editions. Most of the words are correct. They're all well chosen, carefully chosen, not necessarily well chosen, but carefully chosen. The first list is a list of the 10. Well, I'll read some bullets. We think back over our lives and make a list of the 10 events in our entire life that caused us the greatest emotional pain. Okay? And these are really pain. And 10's an arbitrary number. I mean, several. Pick the several events in your life that you still are hanging on to that cause you the most emotional pain. They might have been so painful that you thought you'd rather die at the moment than go on. And list specific events, not generic ones. I mean, it may have been very emotionally painful to you that your father did such and such to you, but I don't want to know that your father, we don't want to list the fact that my father used to abuse me, but think of the particular time when it caused you the most emotional pain that your father did. You want a specific instance, okay? And then describe and write these down. Make a list of these, and not a page on each one, just a sentence or 2 on each one. Describe very briefly in your own words what the event was, what happened. And it says here, and it's important, make no attempt to be reasonable about it. It wasn't reasonable. To the one who was receiving the abuse or the perpetration or the whatever, or the loss or the abandonment or the whatever, it was not reasonable. Okay, so make no attempt to be reasonable about it. Just write down what happened. And if you can, write down what it felt like. Stress on the word felt. What it felt like when you were in the middle of it. When they were doing it to me. I felt like my mother thought I was worthless and stupid, or my father thought I was a piece of shit, or whatever it is it felt like. Try to get the words down. And if you can, also try to think about it a bit more and see if there's any dialogue with it. Think about whether or not you were thinking anything about it or hearing anything about it. Like when my mother thought I was worthless and stupid, that clearly the dialogue that I'm generating for myself. My mother's not saying that unless she's saying it explicitly. Chances are I felt like she thought I was worthless and stupid. Okay, so that's the kind of dialogue I'm talking about. What I'm hearing is, you're always going to be worthless and stupid. Or I may be hearing, I will always be worthless and stupid. Okay, so try to see if there's any dialogue that goes with that event. And make up this list of 10 things, and then I want you to take this list and pick somebody in this group or anybody else the one who brought you this work, perhaps somebody who's done this work before, and go over your list with them. And it doesn't need to be a two-way thing. I mean, I may take my list to you, and you may take your list to her. You want to pick somebody to go over this list with. And if you were to bring it to me, what I would do is listen to what you said, and I would write down a couple of keywords like, thought I'd be abandoned, or I thought, you'd never come back, or I thought, I try to write down some keywords and describe the type of event it was. I would just take some little notes about what was going on. And then when it's all done, when you've been through all 10 of them, and like I say, keep them brief. I mean, these things should be 2 or 3 sentences each. We don't want to spend the afternoon doing this. The whole session, both sessions, there's 2 steps to this. Usually takes 45 minutes or an hour or something like that because we want to be thorough. But what you'll discover is that the 10 most emotional events in your life all have a common pattern. He left me at this time. She left me at this time. Mother left me. Father died. 8 different people at 8 different times in my life have left. Okay? There's a good chance we have an abandonment script. Okay? Or I could make an endless list of groups, clubs, that I was not accepted into. Okay? Because my script was that will never be accepted. Now, I have no idea whether I would have been accepted by any of these groups had I even applied. Probably, See, that's irrelevant. We're not talking about reasonable. We're talking about... Okay, so that's one list we're going to do. And really go to your book and read the 3 pages about that. And then the second list is a list of all the compulsive behaviors that I continue to do, and I'm not talking about drug and alcohol or food compulsions or stuff like that, but the behaviors that I continue to do that don't work, that I know they don't work, but I continue to do them and find myself incapable of giving them up. And these behaviors will turn out to be your resistance behaviors. For each script that we're trying to prevent from happening, we have some sort of a behavior. So that if my script is that I will always be ignored and treated with indifference, well then I'm undoubtedly making a lot of noise or being very loud or wearing loud shirts or dancing a lot or doing something to be, to attract attention, and what happens is I do all this stuff to attract attention so you can't ignore me and treat me with indifference, and it really pisses you off, and so you go away, right? So these are behaviors that I have. You'll see it, I love the AA arena. You'll see people in AA that never get serious. They continually have to tell jokes. They're always on. People that are always on, that's a resistance behavior. Or people that are the list in the 20, the misery meter, the several items in there are things, rescuing people, trying to help people that don't want help, trying to save people that aren't in trouble, trying to do good for people that wish you just leave them alone, on and on and on. And so think back about the behaviors you do that you know don't work. The bullets are, we do them compulsively. They're based on motives such as being liked, accepted, valued, or such like. They're designed to prevent rejection. All of them are designed to prevent rejection. They haven't worked. We know they haven't worked. They don't gain us anything, usually quite the opposite. And we usually know that if we're looking at this and being honest. And then describe the nature of this behavior. I can never say no to any request for me to do anything. I'm a compulsive do-gooder because I want to be valued, perhaps. Okay. And then you ask yourself what kind of a hidden script this might be designed to resist. So that's the second list. And usually what I do when I do this with somebody is I listen to that first list and we come up with some tentative ideas of what the scripts might be, and then you go to the resistance behavior list, the second list, and look at them and see how they fit. And if we nailed 2 or 3 resistance behaviors, 2 or 3 scripts, then they will have resistance behaviors that correspond to them over here, and they will confirm each other. So what I usually do is listen to the script list, the 10 most emotional events list, and get some ideas about what the scripts might be. If you're talking, we talk about it and such like, get some ideas, and then go down the resistance behavior list and see if that confirms it or not, and how it confirms it and such like. And having been through that list, then we might want to go back over the first list one more time. And the result of this is that we get a pretty good sense, almost invariably we'll discover 1 or 2 scripts, and some number of resistance behavior. By the way, if you can't make any progress at all on your resistance behavior list, ask your partner
Yeah.
or your best friend or your mate. They know them. They're really tired of them. They're tolerating them. So ask them, get these lists and put them together. The end result of this, and this is the first step in getting clear about this process, is we're identifying the fear and we're identifying the behaviors that we do to try to prevent the fear from happening. And the result of this will be a list of our death fears and a list of the behaviors that are designed to prevent them. And it will be true that every script will have a resistance behavior, one or more. And every resistance behavior, every one of these compulsive behaviors, will be designed to prevent one or more scripts. So we should have, when we're done, and it's not going to happen in the first week necessarily, but when we're done, we're going to have a list in which there are 1, 2, or 3, 4 scripts, and some number of resistant behaviors, 1 through 8, and everybody will have a mate on the other list. Every resistant behavior will have 1 or more over here, and every script will have 1 or more over here. There'll be these matched lists, and then we'll know what we're going on, and that will be our first level of clarity on this situation. And I will also tell you that 90%, that's an interesting number, 90% of your misery causing beliefs and behaviors are on those 2 lists. You know? That's how quickly we can break through the really high diabolical pain and misery that we go through. You know, I mean, seeing these lists is going to drop your misery meter score quite a bit. Everybody who hasn't done so, please go to the online website and follow the link to the misery meter and take the test and get your score. Quantify your misery. Because I'm going to ask you to do that again in 10 weeks, and you will be amazed at the difference. You know, we have 347s coming down to 48 in 10 weeks of work, you know, and that's so huge, you know. I mean, it's just amazing the difference that can happen. Yes, please, Lynn.
I have a question. Barbara Mole, I remember a long time ago listening to something she was saying about her daughter and her daughter wanted to, kept on trying to have Barbara respond, and she did her best not to respond. If one responds, or if Barbara, and then she finally responded, would her script having to respond to whatever it was her daughter was doing,
No, that's a different thing than a script event. That's a response, not a reaction. And what she was trying really hard to do was not read her daughter's script. And what happened was her daughter stayed in her resistance behavior so hard and so long that she finally read her mother's script and got a reaction.
So it wasn't something such as, I'm trying to see it as, I hear what you're saying. I just always wonder if trying to, if you said something and I said back, well, that's not how I see it. This is how I'm feeling, which is a human experience. Is that a script, though?
No, that's really statement of fact. It's always fine.
I'm not being heard?
If you're sharing what you're feeling, then that's fine. That's truth. It's always okay to say what I'm feeling because that's your truth. That's being real. We'll talk later on about trying to not read scripts and about stuff like that. Delivering love instead of reading scripts, because that's the kindest thing you can do to somebody is not read their script. But yes, please.
So, I'm still stuck on asking my mate about
Then don't. Then ask your girlfriend.
Okay, well, because I'm feeling all this defensiveness come up.
Yeah, then don't.
So no. Okay.
Then ask your girlfriends. You don't need to ask him. I'm just saying that's a good way to find out what they are. But of course, you may be.
But it's his opinion.
You might be. Then you consider whether or not what he said rings true or not, and if it's not, ignore it.
Okay.
Yeah, always. There is. Each of us has in our center what Barbara used to call a radar for truth. If you will pay attention to yourself, when you hear a statement you will know whether it's for you or not. If your partner says, well, you always do blah, 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 then you hear that and you just take it in. To him you say thank you, regardless of whether it's true or not. Thank you. And then you take it in and let it sit and see whether it feels right or not. And it might be, you'd say, well, I see why you might say that, but it's not true or something, you know. But in the case of these resistance behaviors that we're looking at, I mean, there are things that we do compulsively that don't work. So those are pretty easy to, and when he says something, it might just point something. Yeah, if your reaction is anything other than, oh yeah, shit, then it's probably not one, okay? Because the ones that we have are, oh, you know, that kind of thing. Okay? So, pick somebody and do this with it this week, and you can pick anybody that's done the work before that you think would be useful and that, you know, that had enough understanding of scripting resistance behaviors to pick them out for you. You know, they don't need to be a master or a pro, but they need to have some experience. And often the person that brought you here would be good, or whoever you're led to. And I would certainly be willing to do it with any of you that wanted to. If you've done this work before and have, to the point that you had the list of scripts and the list of resistance behaviors, especially if you still have it, hang on to it. If you've done that, though, then do this review of your life over the period of time since your last scripting K class. Okay? Take a look at the last 3 years, we know. Take a look at the last 3 years, or 4 or 5, however long it's been. Take a look at those and see what's going on, and see which scripts continue, persevere, and which ones don't. See where you're at now. And if you even find one script and one resistance behavior, that will be sufficient for the purposes of this workshop, because we treat them all exactly the same, and having one to work with is quite fine, you know, and the others will crop up. The other thing is we'll share about them a lot, and when somebody else says, well, my script is such and such, you'll hear that same glitch. The thing is, you know what your scripts are because you've been telling yourself that your whole life, you know. You've just never articulated it perhaps at the conscious level, but, you know, I mean, I discovered my I'll Never Be Accepted script. I forget what triggered it, but, you know, the first I went to a scripting kid class to see what it was all about, and like somebody said something, and it was like, oh shit. And I immediately saw that my whole life had been about not being accepted. So it will be clear to you. When you've got the script, you'll know it, and when you've got the resistance behaviors, you'll know it. And until then, we work at it until we can find them. And really, call anybody. That's what the phone list is for. Pick somebody on the list. Come to me. Sherry is a pro. Dulcie is a pro. There are a lot of people that have done this work many times. Christy has done it lots of times. Bridget's a pro. Anya's a pro. Anybody else want to raise their pro hand? There are several. Anne's a pro. Christy's a pro. Cynthia's a pro. These are people that have been around several times and have heard lots of scripts and lots of resistance behaviors. So is that clear? And can we all find somebody? And I'm available, like I say. I'm just wide open to you, so I'm be happy to do it with anybody.
Are you just reading your list to the person, or are you discussing it in context?
We're discussing it. We're talking it back and forth until we try to understand what it is you were afraid of when that event happened.
So you're working that out with your partner.
Yeah. You're not just reading it, and that's not good enough, and the other person is not telling you what your script is. That's not acceptable. The fact is that if you were doing it with me, I would listen to it, and I might ask you a question. I might ask a couple of questions that would lead you to think that you were being abandoned in that situation or something. Or did you feel like he was abandoning you? Did you feel like this? Did you feel like this? That kind of question would be appropriate. But just getting a sense of it, these things are deeply rooted in us, and we know them well, although we may not have articulated them. And the resistance behaviors will reflect them, and we know them well, although we may not have been willing to face the fact that we're making fools of ourselves over and over again. But we know all this stuff ourselves right now. We just haven't brought it to a conscious level and articulated and looked at it. So it's really not that. These things are not really hard to find. At least the first one or two. And they're probably, very seldom have we found a person with only one script. They all eventually lead to I'm not good enough. I heard from one of the disciples of Osho, he said, there are two lies in human experience that cause all the trouble. The first is, I'm not good enough. And the second is, I can do something about it. What else? Yes?
Did you say what your resistance behavior was to I'm not being accepted?
Oh yeah, I continually showed you how brilliant I was. I proceeded to demonstrate how smart I was and how valuable I was and how, on and on and on, how much better I was than you. How much, totally unacceptable behaviors when looked at with clarity. Sure. I just wanted to be loved. Actually, I just wanted to be not thrown away. That's what it boils down to. They're all about rejection. They're all about being not good enough and ultimately being rejected. The ones at the deep script level. There are all sorts of games above that will play as this goes on, or as you go on in this work. But the fundamental ones that we're looking at, that the new people especially are looking for, are they're boulders. These are really big rocks. It's so good to drop them. What else? All right, let's just get quiet for a couple more minutes, just to put a seal on it, as Dulcie would say. Okay, thank you very much. I love you all. Meditation here tonight at 7.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. It's like